Courtney, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Tell us where in the world you are. Give us the idea of how did you get into the wine business? I love to hear people's journeys to wine, and I know that the listeners will too.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been quite a journey. And where in the world am I has been a good question lately because I've been traveling a lot lately. But at this exact moment, I'm in St. Helena, which is a really lovely town at the north end of Napa Valley, about an hour and a half north of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, which funnily enough, and maybe everything kind of comes full circle for a reason, this is where my wine journey started. So I was living in New York City in my 20s as a reporter, and my dream was to move to New York City and become a writer as a young girl living in the Midwest. And so in some ways I did do that. So I moved to New York City in my 20s and did some writing there and just fell in love with wine, right? So it tends to kind of captivate those people who are just naturally very curious. And that was definitely me, especially like working as a journalist and trying to understand things. And so I moved out to St. Helena to attend the Culinary Institute of America that has a campus just right north of St. Helena here, stone's throw from where I am right now. So I studied there for about a year, and I worked with some really great mentors, and we studied everything from wine tasting to viticulture to winemaking to the business side of the wine industry as well. So it was a really great immersion in terms of kind of starting a new career at like 30 years old. It was just a really great kind of like kickstart. Met a lot of interesting people, got a lot of really, really good advice. But something that I still think about every single day in my wine career is one of the teachers there, Christy Dufo. Her approach was you never put yourself onto the wine. You never say like, oh, this is good or this is bad. You're always trying to learn from it. And like, what can this wine teach me about where it comes from, who made it, how the vines are tended and grow, and the history and the culture of that place. So that's been a very much of a guiding principle for me throughout my whole career, which to continue the journey took me into San Francisco as a sommelier. I worked with a very famous French chef there called Dominique Crenn. So she had 3 Michelin stars with her first restaurant. And then I helped to open her second restaurant, which is called Petite Crenn, which was a really exciting adventure, intense. Wow. Intense for sure.
I bet.
Yeah. But that's where I fell in love with champagne. So it was a French seafood restaurant. We didn't serve any meat. So it was a lot of oysters, and, working for such a renowned chef, I had access to a lot of really special grower champagnes. And so that kind of started me on this journey of just being really interested in trying to understand champagne and sparkling wine.
That's great. I'm a huge Bubbles fan as well. I'm excited to talk about your wine company that you started and taste your sparkling wine that I know we're calling California Crémant, I think is sort of the idea that you're putting forth. But how did you go from, working in this prestigious restaurant, tasting the greatest champagnes of the world, right? And what sparked the idea that you wanted to make something in California? I don't know if I would say that would rival, but that would be its own expression, just as champagne is an expression of that French region.
Yeah, correct. That was really important to me because I think what I loved about champagne was that sense of terroir and how it expresses a place, even though there's a lot of wine making that happens, right? Like you ferment the grapes and then you bottle them and then you ferment them again. So you're kind of making a wine twice. But the idea that it could still transmit, the voice of the soil and the culture was just so fascinating to me. And what I saw in California, and I love all people who are making sparkling wine, and I want more people to do it.
Yes.
But what I saw was kind of because the sparkling wine industry in California was sort of pioneered by big champagne companies, so Domaine Carneros, Domaine Chandon, Roederer, so that kind of set the standard for sparkling wine in California. And so smaller producers, whether it be not smaller, so now larger producers like Sharmsburg and Iron Horse, and then the smaller producers now like Ultramarine or Po wines. I mean, there's so many amazing like champagne style sparkling wines in California. But I think what I was interested in was finding a different way to tell the story of California instead of through the lens of champagne. So I actually looked more towards the guidelines of like Crémant de Loire, because there's such a vast style of sparkling wines in France that isn't champagne, that is often kind of like fresher and more affordable as well. So I was kind of more interested in telling that story versus trying to make like a wine that rivaled champagne. And so when you kind of step out of that champagne parameters, a lot of things open up to you in terms of aging, grape varieties to work with. And so that was the wine that I was always kind of interested in making was, and so how I kind of learned to talk about it was by calling it California Crémant, because it is a method champenois. It's 2 full fermentations, but I'm not trying to make a champagne style wine, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. The French Cremants until now have always been sort of a little secret or a tip that I give people if they love champagne, sparkling wine, but they're looking for something French and a little less expensive. Cremants from Loire, Burgundy, Bordeaux. I mean, all over France, they're making different sparkling wines. And yes, the grapes are different, right? But they do have rules, as far as aging and different things. But how do you see this? Are you the first one to be making a California Crémant? And did you trademark that yet?
Great questions. No, I don't think I'm the first to do anything. There's a lot of really small producers doing sparkling wine. There's Carboniste wines. They call themselves American Sparkling Wine or something. And they're making some really wonderful wines that are everything between like full on pet nat to more of like what I'm doing, which is disgorged, but still really fresh. And there's a winemaker called Hammerly that's making like really wonderful wines and works with some Sauvignon Blanc. So I'm not like the first, I didn't invent this. I think I'm just kind of the first to sort of like give it a name and try to find a way to talk about it. And so that's a little bit of like the sommelier and the journalist in me that's like the storytelling, right? And trying to present it to people as a way that kind of makes sense. And I think a point I want to make about you recommending, the Cremants of France as a more affordable and accessible alternative to champagne is that yes, they are, but it's also a different flavor profile, right? Like I want to drink bubbles every day, but I don't always want to drink champagne. I don't always need that richness or that chalkiness that you're getting from the Blanc de Blancs or that red fruit that you're getting from the Blanc de Noirs or, the powerful rosés. Like sometimes you just want something different.
Yes.
And so I think that's like an important way to talk about it is it's not, it's not necessarily a lesser than, I think what it is just getting away from comparing it to champagne and just letting it kind of be its own thing. And so that's where I really want to rally with my allies in the wine industry that are doing that. It's not a less than, it's just its own thing,
right.
And it's not even a competition. I think the more people are drinking bubbles, they're going to drink, Delphinium one night and then they're, going to drink Grower Champagne the other night. And that's wonderful.
Well, tell me about Delphinium. How did you get started? Because to start, a new wine brand has to be overwhelming. And I'm sure there's many steps, but what was the thing that really pushed you forward in starting this? And then I definitely want you to walk me through the wine and let's taste it together.
Cool. I'm going to answer your question in 2 ways. I'm going to answer it one way with kind of like the spiritual way that led me to making this wine, and then also the logistics, because I think a lot of your listeners would be really interested in how does a person who's kind of been working in restaurants and like how do you do that, right? There's no like straight path to how to start a wine brand. So for me, like on the more like kind of like spiritual side of it, it was the pandemic, and I was living out. I moved from San Francisco up to a little town on the Sonoma coast called Jenner. If anyone's familiar with it, it's at the mouth of the Russian River. So it's where the Russian River opens into the ocean. And so it's an amazing habitat and sanctuary for a lot of wildlife. The Russian River is, one of the most influential geological formations in terms of, the Sonoma County wine scene, in terms of the soils and the atmosphere there. And so this is where I lived for a year. I lived there for 7 years actually, but my first full year was during the pandemic. And so you're just sort of like isolated out there. And I'm living in this natural environment, and I'm, sitting on my porch, and you can kind of see the ocean, and it's about like probably 300 feet above it. And, all of these like blossoms are blooming, all of the spring blooms. And then that salty air is kind of blowing in, in the afternoon. And I'm sitting out there shucking oysters from Hog Island, which was about 30 minutes south. That's where they farm the oysters. So you can go down there and pick up a bag of oysters, and I'm drinking, some kind of sparkling wine, and just like, this is it. Like, it just kind of clicked for me that this was the California story and environment that I wanted to capture in a wine. Like, this was kind of like the terroir that I loved so much. And so spending so much time in that environment during such a crazy time in the world and finding so much like peace and connection to nature is what I was sort of like bottled up in me. And so then logistically, so now we'll shift to the logistics. In early 2021, a dear friend of mine, his name is Sam Bilbro, and he has a winery called Idlewild, and he makes really wonderful Piemontese grape varieties from
Mm,
Mendocino, and has a tasting room in Healdsburg, which is also a lovely little town in Sonoma County.
fizz.
Definitely visit if anyone's listening. It's really wonderful. And so he had reached out to me through a mutual friend, was kind of like, what are you doing? He was looking for someone to kind of run, like reinvigorate the hospitality, kind of coming out of COVID, start up events again, do sales. We also opened like a little wine shop. And so I thought, well, yeah, let's talk. That could be really interesting. And I could continue living in Jenner and drive in. And then early on in our conversation, I told him I had kind of had this idea, this inspiration to make this sparkling wine. And so he's like, yeah, like let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Let's make it happen. And so it was really through that relationship and through working as a full-time hospitality manager, essentially, for his business, that he mentored me and gave me the resources to start making some wine. And so,
Amazing.
if you don't have a lot of money,
Right.
that's a great way to do it. You get the mentorship, you get the resources, and then I'm also contributing, my skills to the business as well. So that was how
That's
it
great.
started. That was in 2021.
And the name, obviously beautiful. The packaging is gorgeous. So tell us a
Thank
little
you.
bit about Delphinium. And I'm going to show people as you're doing that, the ones that are watching. I wore my Delphinium blue for you today.
Thank you. And I
You're
wore
welcome.
the white, so
Yes.
perfect.
So we got the team. So it's a blue flower, correct? If I understand.
It is a blue flower. It's the Delphinium is in the larkspur family. So there's many, many different varieties of Delphiniums. And the one that I sort of use is called a belladonna Delphinium. And the name, I always feel like I'm going off on a ledge of like way too specific, but the word actually comes from an anthocyanidin, which is what gives things their color, called delphinidin. And it's one of the rarest colors of blue in nature. So, when you see certain colors in nature and they just like pop and you're like, whoa, like how did nature make that? Like for me, that's one of those colors. It's just so beautiful. And it's also a little bit of a nod to my sister's daughter, who was born in 2017, and her name is Delphine. And the label that you see on there is a cyanotype. So it's like a sun print of the original bouquet that I gifted my sister on the day that my sweet niece was born. And she's like, what, 7 and 8 now? And she's just wild and creative and so much fun. And so she's kind of like my spirit animal. But yeah, that's Delphinium.
Love that. Well, I have a little here in my glass. So since this may be the first time people are hearing about California Crémant, tell us a little bit about the grapes you're using here and how you're creating this wine that may be similar or different than other sparkling wines people have tried.
Sure, absolutely. I'll kind of talk about what I do. And then if you have any questions in terms of comparison that would help people, let me know.
Yes.
So what I do is I start with a musqué clone of Sauvignon Blanc, which is a very like aromatic Sauvignon Blanc, and then Chardonnay as well. And the Sauvignon Blanc is typically picked a little bit riper. So I really want those like aromatics to kind of come through. And then the Chardonnay is picked a little earlier, and that creates kind of like more of the texture in the backbone for the wine. And so the grapes are picked. Oh, and they're all farmed organically, which has always been really important to me. And I'm sure you and your listeners as well. So farmed organically, picked at the appropriate time. I think there's a tendency for sparkling wine producers to feel pressure to pick like super, super early. And I don't think that you always have to. So I'm kind of less interested in like what the resulting alcohol and the sugar is going to be, and more like the acidity and then the flavor. So one of my early mentors said, to make a great sparkling wine, you have to make a good wine or a great wine and then make a great sparkling wine. So that was very much like in my mind is like, okay, make a good wine and then make a good sparkling wine. So the Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, pretty straightforward, pressed in stainless steel tanks and then fermented natively. So no sulfur or yeast added. And then they go through full alcoholic and full malolactic fermentation. When you're doing it natively, that often just kind of happens concurrently. And then once it's completely done, you run the labs. There's no more malic acid. There's no more sugar in the wine. It's totally dry. Then I add about 15 to 20 parts of sulfur. So that just kind of keeps it safe until bottling in January. So by the time the wine is released, there's no measurable sugar or sulfur in the wine at all. It kind of, it eats it up, but it just keeps it safe until January, February, when when we bottle. And then that's bottled with the traditional Liqueur terroir. So it's a house cultivated yeast and sugar. And then that's added to the bottle with the wine, crown cap, and then it undergoes full secondary fermentation. That takes about 6 weeks. So a lot shorter than I ever realized, actually.
Yeah.
And then for me, kind of keeping in the Crémant standards, it's about 10 to 12 months in bottle. So much shorter than you would find in champagne.
The resulting, is it considered a brut if you were to use that scale, or where would it fall?
It would be extra brut.
The
Yeah,
dosage?
there's zero sugar in it. And
Zero,
the dosage
okay.
that I add, yeah, correct. And I top it with itself. So there's no sugar added at the dosage time. So fully
Lovely.
disgorged, so no sediment. And then yeah, it's kind of an interesting process. You take one bottle off the line, and then that bottle is used to fill the other bottles to compensate for the loss.
Lovely. Yeah. So it's organic, which I know, yeah, like you said, a lot of us care about and are looking for that. But also lots of people are looking and maybe under the wrong impression that sparkling wine has a lot more sugar than maybe a still white wine. And so in this case, zero, which is,
Zero.
Probably would please a lot of people.
Yes.
And so that's wonderful. And, obviously the grapes are different here than in other Crémants or champagnes. What do you see, since, the Chardonnay and the Sauvignon Blanc are a team here, the Sauvignon Blanc, I guess, is giving you more of the fruit and the bouquet, and the Chardonnay more of the roundness and the body, or?
So it's kind of hard to say exactly. Like, I don't know that there's a clear answer to what it's giving you. I mean, I played around with some different varieties the first couple years, which were, when I was working with Sam, those were actually winery blends. So he farms 42 different grape varieties. So there was a lot in the cellar. There was a lot of finished wine to kind of play around with. And so we tasted, Riesling, Friulano, because I was open to anything, and so it was really like kind of putting together, because it was sort of manifesting terroir, right? So I had this idea of like the coast and the saltiness and what I wanted it to taste like. So it's like, what grapes and what regions can we use to kind of create that? So I'm not exactly sure. There's a lot of Chardonnay that grows, in this area. And so I think for me, it was the Chardonnay is more about just picking at the right time. And the Sauvignon Blanc, I think, is more about those really lovely aromatics. But both of them bring really wonderful, like natural acidity.
Absolutely. And if somebody said, explain to me how this sparkling wine differs than, say, a champagne or a California made in the style of champagne. I know you said freshness. Is there anything else you would kind of point people to?
Yeah, freshness, more kind of primary fruit characters, kind of a mix of like stone fruit and citrus. No red, there's no red fruit. So a lot of champagnes have some amount of Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier in it. So this is just 100% a Blanc de Blanc. And I wanted to get a nice purity, a little bit of yeastiness. To me, it's almost kind of like walking past a bakery, where you get a little bit of that whiff. Or sometimes it makes me think of like a Pilsner beer, almost like that kind of like a little bit of that slight yeastiness.
Right.
So I wanted some of that, but I didn't want it to overpower the fruit. And I also wanted I didn't want to filter it going into bottle, which is very, very common in sparkling wine. And so I wanted it to have enough acidity, but also a really nice texture, because I wasn't going to be like stripping it through a filter going into the bottle. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. It's still very like mystical to me, right? Like, and part of me wanting to make wine was to understand it. And so it's interesting, this being 2024 was my fourth year. And it was really the first year that I was 100% on my own. So without kind of the tutelage and the umbrella of another winery. It was like, I sourced the fruit, I called the pick, I made all the winemaking decisions, kind of by myself. Wow. Always like, hey, what do you think about this? Or how's that going? Always learning, of course, but it was really like scary. It was really scary. But it's like, I knew I was getting it right when I tasted the wine after it, as it was going. But then when it finished ML, and then we blended the Sauvignon Blanc and the Chardonnay together, and you're so scared, right? You're like, okay, now the wine is done, and is it going to be good? And especially when you're not manipulating, right? You're not adding acid, you're not adding water, you're not adjusting. So you're just like terrified, and it's a huge financial investment, right? And so I tasted it and I was just like, it just tasted like Delphinium. And I just knew it right away, you know? And so it had that characteristic that it was like, yes, even as a still wine before bubbles, I was like, this tastes like Delphinium.
That's great.
It's
And you
kind of magical,
mentioned,
is what I'm saying.
yes, you mentioned it's delicious, and you mentioned
Thank
I'm
you.
here on the East Coast. I'm on the eastern shore of Maryland, but seafood is the huge thing. We're off of the Chesapeake Bay, so we have oysters from this side, and crabs. They're also a really big thing, and so seafood is front and center here. I'm assuming that's one of your suggested pairings. Are there any other foods that you just love to pair with the Delphinium?
Yeah, I love pairing it with anything that's super umami. So, you know, miso, kombu, any kind of like really savory broths, ramen. It's really good with that. I went out to the coast a few weeks ago and Delphinium kind of organized this seaweed foraging expedition with a professional culinary seaweed forager. And so we went out at like 6 a.m. into the low tide and we're just like pulling up seaweed, you know, and tasting it and smelling it. And so for me, that's just like the ultimate, like anytime you can incorporate like umami or like, you know, seaweed flavors into your food, it works really well with Delphinium.
And sushi, maybe?
Absolutely, 100%. That kind of like the koji flavors, that kind of like vinegary, ricey thing. Yeah, it's delicious. Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. So, if folks want to check out more about the wine, I think it's right now you're just shipping direct to consumer, or how do people go about getting a bottle if they want to give this a try?
Yeah, absolutely. I ship almost everywhere in the country. There's a couple states that are problematic, but pretty much everywhere from my website. It's $45 a bottle. I do flat rate shipping of $20. So whether you're on in California or in Maryland, it's a flat rate shipping of $20, which I think makes it a little bit easier. And then, yeah, I am in wholesale distribution. If anyone's listening that's a distributor, like reach out. I am looking for I am
Right.
looking
I
for more
know.
distribution partners.
This is a beautiful wine. I think it's an inspiring story to I mean, I'm a career changer as well into wine
Yeah.
from tech. It seems like there's a lot of people that come from other careers into this business, but certainly to go from being a writer to a som at one of the top restaurants in the country, and then to make this brand, a reality. I know you're gonna be inspiring some people for sure. So California Crémant, I know not an official term maybe in the world of wine yet. What do you see as your next steps maybe for the industry in sort of defining maybe a California style, or maybe it's region by region, like maybe there's a Sonoma Coast style and there's a sparkling wine style in a different region. What do you see next for yourself?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. And what I kind of found as a writer and as a sommelier is that most people don't really care too much about those distinctions. And I think if anything, like the current political environment is just teaching us that like, you know, borders aren't real and we need to just keep an open heart, you know, and you know, when I'm writing about wine and, you know, you're writing about a certain AVA and there's like, you know, a clear geological structure like a river or a mountain that changes the climate. You're like, okay, I get it. But there's often these kind of like political borders or even like, you know, a state border, a state line, you know, between Oregon and Washington or Oregon and California. And you're like, what, why are people love California wine, but they don't like Oregon wine when it's coming from the same sort of geological area or something, right? So I don't think that I really want to focus too much on laws and actually I kind of did try to trademark it. Not that I was going to enforce it, but I was just kind of curious about that process. And it didn't work because both of the terms are too general, both California and Cremant. But I just think it's I want everyone to make more bubbles and make quality
Agree.
bubbles and drink more bubbles and realize like you're saying that they're not always sweet. They're not going to give you a headache. Like we're talking about, you know, high quality wine here. I love pet nat wines. You know, those are super fun to drink as well. So I think for me, it's just about, for me, like defining California Crémant was just a way to tell my story.
Hmm.
And so, yes, there's definitely other people making wine this way. And if they find that useful to tell their story, like 100%, like, you know, do it. Like words are really powerful. And so like, if that's like a helpful term for other people who are making wine in a similar way, yeah, I hope that they do it. But I am interested in organizing some kind of like a sparkling wine festival in
Oh, I love that.
California just to kind of showcase the many different types of sparkling wine and just kind of to celebrate what other people are doing. So stay tuned.
Yes,
I'd
I
love to
love
do
that
something like
idea.
that eventually. Yeah,
Send
it
me
would
an
be so
invite
fun.
when you get it figured out.
Okay. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Courtney, thank you so much for sharing Delphinium with us. This is delicious and fun, and I love your story. It's very inspiring, and we just appreciate you coming on The Sipping Point.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Talk to you soon. Cheers.
Cheers.